Good morning. Morning. All right, make sure there are people around. Matthew, I don't know how you do it, play the piano and sing at the same time. I can't play a tune or hold a tune. So I commend you for the special number that you did. It is very good that we do know that hope has a name, and his name is Jesus. And thank you for that, Matthew, as you sang that special number and as you played the piano there. I always admire when young men step up and use the gifts that God has given them, and they share that with not only with us as a congregation, but they use them to serve the Lord. So, Matthew, may you be blessed in that, and as you continue to do that, may you truly find joy in serving the Lord during that time. And also to our worship, these guys that sang, worship leaders, the guys that sang the songs, I commend you guys as well to come up here and to lead us in worship and to just prepare us for what God is going to do throughout these next 30 minutes or so, and to see where He is going to lead us and where He is going to take us, and the challenges that He is going to present before us. And not only that, to our pastor couple who gets to sit in this morning and listen to a message this morning instead of bringing a message. We know that Pastor Gerhardt was gone last week, and Jake Giesbrecht stepped in and filled his shoes for that day, but they had some business they had to take care of, and that he is here with us this morning and is able to enjoy a Sunday morning message without having to work. And it's always good to be able to preach in front of your home pastor, and that way you can get together with him during the week and he can buy lunch and tell you where you can make changes. So if anybody else wants that opportunity, raise your hand. No, he does not do that. He is a very loving pastor and a very caring one that wants to see the best in everybody that serves and worships. So again, it's good that you guys can be here with us this morning and to worship with us. I've titled my message this morning, and it's out of Matthew chapter 28, verses 16 to 20. And simply just put, we all know that this is subtitled, or in your Bibles it is given that Jesus gives the Great Commission. It is where Jesus tells us all to go out and to make disciples, or to preach to all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. This passage of Scripture is very familiar to us. But I want to look at it this morning and point out a few things that I have overlooked during this time while I have studied it and I have looked at it. And the focus has always been on the words that Jesus spoke. That we are called as disciples, or we are called to go out and to do these things. And I want to look this morning a little bit at verse 16 and verse 17. I want to focus on that a little bit more this morning. You know, Jesus comes up to the disciples here in Galilee and He gives them the Great Commission. But beforehand, in chapter 26, verse 32, this is where Jesus predicts Peter's denial again. And in chapter 26, verse 32, He tells Peter that before the rooster crows 3 times today, you will have denied me 3 times. And then Jesus tells him that after I have died and I have resurrected, I want you guys to meet me in Galilee. And then a couple of passages in Matthew chapter 28, after Jesus has been crucified, and you guys remember this all takes course in a matter of a couple of days, within a week's time, that all this happens. Jesus has died, He has been crucified, He has been laid in the tomb. And now the women, Mary and Martha, or the women, are going to prepare the body, to preserve the body. And as they are going to the tomb where Jesus is, an angel appears to them. And the angel says, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified." In verse 6 of 28, it says, "He is not here, He is risen." just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. And then the angel tells the women, then go quickly and tell the disciples, he has risen from the dead, and he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you. And this is what the angels had told the women as they were on their way to the tomb. Then, as they are on their way back from the tomb, Jesus meets the women. A couple of verses down. He tells them greetings, and then later on he tells them, do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me. So it is now 3 times that either through Jesus or the angels have told the disciples or the women that were meeting the disciples that they were to go to Galilee. As we look at the passage in chapter 28, verse 16, we see that that is where the disciples then went. But with that, I want to ask a question this morning. In the back of your mind or in your heart or in your soul, you sometimes feel that you should go do something, right? As if Jesus is calling you to go and to share. No, it can't be. Because the first time Jesus told the disciples, everything Jesus had predicted Peter's denying him. And so the chaos around us sometimes blocks that voice out that we can't hear it or we don't want to hear it. And then God sends it in a different way. He sent it through the angels to the women. And we sometimes block that voice out, and Jesus tells us 3 different times or 3 different ways, maybe more, maybe less, that we should go and do something, or we should go and meet him. And in this case, he was calling the disciples to go and meet in Galilee. And he says, then the 11 disciples went into Galilee to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. You remember that as Jesus started his ministry, he called 12. But as we know that Judas sold Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. Told the Romans where he was for 30 pieces of silver. So now there are only 11. These young men had walked with Jesus for 3 years while he was here on this earth. They had ministered with him. And that is the way that sometimes our life goes. We will walk with Christ our entire life. And some of us may sell out in the end for something that appears to be more glamorous or more beautiful or more fitting or something that we could use instead, materialistically. So Judas is not there. So the 11 went up there to the mountain where they met Jesus. And I think that this is the same way that God calls us to meet together. He calls us to a meeting place where we get encouraged, where He gives us direction, where He gives us guidance, where He wants to bring His people together to give them the command to go out and to teach, to preach, to baptize, all of those things. But these were just ordinary men. What was special about them? If you read later on in the earlier passages or in the beginning of the 4 Gospels, you read that majority of them were fishermen. A doctor, tax collector, different things that they were, different things that they did. There was nothing special about them. They all had daily jobs that they went to. Jesus called them into the ministry, and they walked with Him for 3 years. So where are we at in our daily life? We oftentimes go out and we meet with people and we talk with people and we have jobs. We have mechanics in here. We have truck drivers. We have carpenters, construction people. We have farmers. We are of wide variety. We are house moms. We take care of the home. Some of you have jobs where you go out and work as women. We could say that we are just ordinary people, right? So is this a job that God has given Pastor Gearhart to go out and do? Of course it is, right? We pay him, right? We pay him to go out and to tell people about Christ and to teach us. But what is it about you whenever you go out and you share the gospel with somebody? You're sitting in line somewhere and you go and talk to somebody. Your attitude, the way that you speak to them. You're at a construction site. You're on the farm. A new employee shows up. Well, what do? Well, I'm a farmer. I'm a farmhand, or I'm a truck driver. Okay, so you talk a little bit about the line of work that you do. But what if Pastor Gearhart goes up to somebody and addresses them or they address him? Who are you? I'm Gearhart Penner. What do? I'm a pastor. Oh, you're one of those. It's his job to share Christ. Automatically, because he has the title pastor, we assume that he is going to share Christ with everybody that he comes in contact with, right? But not only is it his job, it is our job. He has called us to go out and to share. Just as we are ordinary people, these 11 disciples, they had no greater education, they had no diplomas, they had no roles, they did not know anything, but Christ taught them. And in the same way that Christ has taught us, we should go out and we should share. But they met him up there in Galilee on the mountain. And then in verse 17 it says, when they saw him, they worshiped him. But some doubted. Now we worship God this morning. We worship Jesus this morning. Through our Sunday school, through our worship, and throughout this morning we have worshiped God. But do some of you doubt? Raise your hand if you've ever doubted. I think we can all raise our hands, right? These men walked with Jesus for 3 years. They saw him, they worshiped him, and some of them doubted. Is this real? Is this truth? They saw him and they worshiped him, but yet they doubted. We've been in youth ministry for many years. And there are many times that we doubt. What is the purpose? We don't see God working even though he is standing in front of us. How is this going to come together? Now what? Is it truly as you say it is, God? What if? Is always the big one. When you doubt, what comes to mind? You question God, right? Are you truly a loving God? Do you truly care? Because if you did, then Jesus would not have been crucified on the cross and we would not be all scattered as the disciples were. But if you truly loved me and cared for me, then this wouldn't happen in my life. God, if your promises are all good, then why do bad things happen? We begin to question who God is and what he is going to do in our life. And these young men, they walked with him for 3 years. They physically saw with their own eyes what he had done, how he had healed, and they doubted. In the 1960s, Jiang Qing, the powerful wife of the communist leader Mao Tse-tung, announced that she would destroy Christianity in China in 3 months. She had set up a program to erase the name of Christ in China to erase the name of Christ. And as the story goes on, mobs of people who had devoted their lives to Mao burned Bibles and hymnals. These were people that followed her and were going to erase Christianity from China in 3 months. Police arrested church leaders and sentenced them to labor camps. Christians were forced to denounce Christ and vow loyalty to Mao. Old women who clung to their faith were publicly humiliated, some beaten to death. Pastors were hung, bearing the names Christians who resisted. They were shunned or forced out of their homes to live in the fields like animals. Flames of persecution spread across China, charring the spiritual landscape. Eventually, Mao's wife announced to the world that the Christian movement in China was finished. The only place for the church was in the History Museum. However, Mao and his wife did not win. It says that rather than destroy Christianity, the persecution fortified the church. Up from the ashes grew a lovelier, more fragrant flower from Christian witness. Today, in a land where Bibles are virtually non-existent, were virtually non-existent for 40 years, Christian churches are sending missionaries to proclaim the gospel along the Silk Road, reaching Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists in China. The Middle East, Africa, and India, other courageous missionaries are crossing into North Korea. When we think of how Christianity and how they were trying to destroy Christ in China, there's a national flower that grows in China, and it's called the Chinese plum blossom. Because it blooms in the harshest of winters, the plum blossom has become a symbol of perseverance and resilience. And the gospel is blooming in China and spreading in pursuit of the Great Commission. So with that, where do we go? We read about it in China. We see it all over the world, but where do we go? Where does that leave us? Jesus used ordinary people. And Jesus still uses ordinary people who know Him personally. No kits, nothing. We have our phones. We have access to many more things than the disciples did at that time. You want to know what the disciples looked like? Look in the mirror. If you're a child of God, you are a disciple. You are called to go. They were folks like us. They were sinful, unsophisticated, fearful, and uncertain what to do next. These disciples were ordinary people. But Jesus also presented a very brief and simple and clear plan. If you look, He says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. And in verse 19, therefore, go and make. Very simple. The Great Commission is to make. Make what? Disciples. How do we make disciples? How? By going, teaching, baptizing. It's not just a casual suggestion. The Great Commission is a firm command, and Jesus left no room for doubt regarding the scope. All the nations. The Great Commission is to go and make. And with that, He says it is not a casual suggestion. It is a command that He gives. We often hesitate whenever we need to share Christ with somebody or we need to do the right thing. Jesus says there is no room for hesitation in sharing my salvation plan with people. Jesus was intense about it. It was a command that he had given to the disciples. Jesus expected obedient action from all of his followers. To tell it to you straight, if you're a believer and you're not actively participating in fulfilling the Great Commission, you're not obeying the Lord's calling on your life. Nobody gets a pass. Jesus' marching orders are clear. They're not negotiable, and he expects obedient action from each one of us. So how do we become so bold in going and sharing? Because we oftentimes doubt. We become so easy to doubt. And we think that I can't do this. Or what are they going to say? At the very end, I want to ease your doubt, and I want to tell you how it is that you can do it. But before we go there, I want to give you some points here as to what we need to do to be able to go and make disciples. First of all, what do we say? Right? I mean, that's the hardest thing always. How do you start the conversation? What do we say? First of all, you have to speak. When people ask you about your faith, you need to have an answer. The only way that you can answer is by experience of knowing who God is and what He has done in your life. We need to use words. Whenever we talk to them, we need to be able to speak. We need to be gentle but yet respectful and bold. But what is giving you hope? And be prepared to give an answer for that. Words have power to change lives. The next thing that we often ask is, where do we go? I told you the story about China. I don't think any of us are ready to pack our bags and go to China, right? We're kind of good right where we're at, right? We'll leave that for those that God has called to be missionaries, to go overseas and to do that. So where do you go? Sometimes we start in our own homes. We start in our own schools and in our own communities. You love those people that others don't. The ones that get pushed aside. You ask God to open your eyes so that you can see and to give you a love for His people. It's easy to love those who love us, right? Christ even talks about that, but what benefit is that to us? So ask God to give you vision to be able to see people and learn to love those that others don't. We often pray, but God, give me an opportunity. But do we really look for opportunities? Look for the opportunities that are already there. Who are the people that are already there? Last weekend, I had a good chance to share Christ with some people, and I blew it. I blew it big time. We were hanging out at the lake, and we were docking our boat, and we had supposedly taken somebody's spot on the dock. And so we got a little bit confrontational, crossing words back and forth a little bit, and, well, whose dock is it? It's the marina's dock. It's not your spot, so why can't I park there? And so we were going back and forth a little bit. So we finally get in our boat. We move our boat away. Another boat comes in. You're using my ropes to tie up your boat. I want my ropes. Now where do we go? And so this went back and forth for a little bit, and I was beginning to get a little bit frustrated. So we finally took our boat around to an area where there was nobody there. We dug our ropes out of our boat to tie our boat onto the dock and stuff. And after tying up our boat, out of frustration, I was sitting there tying up the boat. And in the back of my mind, I thought this is an opportunity to share Christ, but I was like, oh no, this is an opportunity to share some of Pete's advice. And as we finished tying up the boat, we were walking by them, my wife and I. And I looked down at the guy who was tying his boat in our spot. Is there anybody else's spot that we have taken that we need to move our boat? And he just calmly looked up at me and he says, no, you haven't. And my wife quickly said to me, that's not how we talk to people. And it humbled me for a moment. And it made me think for a long time that evening about the opportunity that I had had to share Christ to those people. But because of my pride and my ego and me thinking that I was in the right, I was not going to allow that to happen. Now these guys, they may have had a little bit too much to drink. Who knows? We don't know. We didn't see. But they were sure acting like it, and they were talking like it. But my response was not any better to them than they were to me. So oftentimes we ask God to give me an opportunity. And unless we are right with God, we misuse or we misrepresent those opportunities that are given to us. We tell God to put people in our path that I can minister to, that I can teach. And so often we respond to them the same way that they respond to us. We need to realize that we're all in relationships. And we're all in a relationship with Christ. And if we desire others to have that relationship, we need to make it fragrant. We need to make it beautiful. We are Christ's ambassadors. We are to follow Him and to obey His teachings. When Jesus met with the 11 up in Galilee, they worshiped Him as we do here every Sunday, and whenever we have our Bible studies, and when you guys meet for prayer meetings, when you have your devotions at home, as families, as individuals, around the dinner table. They worshiped Him as we do every day. But yet they doubted. They did not know how all this was going to take place. And so to ease our doubt, the command is very simple that Jesus gives. He says, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you, and surely I am with you always, even to the end of age. So when we doubt, we need to remember, it's not Pete's ministries. It's not Gerhardt's ministry. It's not anybody's ministry, but it's God's. When God has called us to go out and to teach and to preach and to baptize and to do everything that He has commanded us, and when we begin to doubt, we simply need to remember that He is with us. He will carry us. He will guide us. He will lead us. We will not be able to do it on our own strength. And so I want to leave you with that. Where do you go? Start by looking for the opportunities that are in front of you. And when they come, make sure that your heart is right before the Lord. And when you begin to doubt, know that Jesus is with you, and He will always be, because it is His ministry, it is not yours. He will give you strength, He will guide you, and He will give you wisdom. May God bless you.